Lesson 8.7, Video 5. Now I'll go back to discussing imaginary numbers and complex numbers. Now there's notation that mathematicians came up with to help us to be able to simplify problems that had roots with negative numbers in it, even though our calculator couldn't do it. And the notation is that if you have a root of a negative number, the negative part can be handled with the I notation. So for example, if we go down below, we have root of negative 81. And root of negative 81, well, that's the same as root of 9 times negative 1. And when we simplify roots, we know that we can write them inside their own little roots. I can root 9, and I get 3. And root negative 1 becomes an I. And that's because of the statement above. I is equal to root of negative 1. Now, that makes this the acceptable simplified answer, 3i. So whenever we have a negative, basically what's going to happen is the I is going to come out as, so the root of negative 1 is going to turn into I. So that is the first part. You still have to deal with the positive part. So root 56, you ask yourself, well, what's the bit largest square that goes into 56? Perfect square, and that's 4. So this becomes 4 times 14. Root 4 is 2. You cannot root 14. And you have this I. So the appropriate way to write this answer is 2i root 14. Now, I squared. I squared was a source of great debate because there's two schools of thought here. If I take the root of negative 1 times the root of negative 1, and we follow the rules of multiplying radicals, I get the root of 1, which is 1. But there's a problem. We also know that if you multiply two things together, or two roots together, and they're the exact same thing, for example, root 3 times root 3 is equal to root 9, which is 3. So in other words, our answer basically became whatever was inside the roots. So if you have root 1 times root 1, with that line of thinking, your answer, based on that observation, should be negative 1. So there was two arguments that were posed, and the conclusion was that they would say I squared equals negative 1. Because root of negative 1 times root of negative 1 is basically I times I, because I is equal to root of negative 1. Now what does that mean? Well, it means that if you ever have an I squared, it's equal to negative 1. So this becomes negative 30. So in conclusion of this, we know that if we have root negative 9, that's equal to 3i. If I have root of negative 7, that's equal to I root 7, because I can't do root 7. If I have an I squared, so 2i squared is equal to a negative 1, so basically it becomes negative 2. And this ends Lesson 8.7, Video 5.